Hello and welcome to another episode of ReConnect. I'm Kilian and Brian, and joining me today is Brian Vecchi, our field CTO. Brian, how's it going today?
It's going well. How are you?
Very good, thank you. So we have a kind of a double-wide extra episode for everyone today. We've combined our last two Connect episodes into one supersized question session with Brian. There's a tongue twister for us too.
Supersized question session. I love it.
There we go. So we are going to be talking about the Active Directory or Hacktive Directory Connect, and I'll put a link to that video in the description if you want to watch the full session, as well as our Automation Engine Connect session too. So really great sessions. Really great questions. I'm on a roll with this rhyming today. I don't know what my thing is. But anyway, I'll jump right into it because we have so many great questions. Brian, are you ready?
I am ready. Yeah, these were good connects, and thanks for everybody that showed up. We had good questions during the sessions, but let's dive into them in some more detail now.
Yeah, this is a great chance to kind of share that with everybody. And again, hopefully if they find this interesting, they find the information interesting, they can, of course, check out the source. So the first question, and this is from the Active Directory or Hacktive Directory session, is can Varonis collect data without endpoint agents? And what about on-premise servers? So how would we do that?
So the answer is yes. And in fact, we don't put anything on the endpoint. We actually don't collect anything from the endpoint directly. Right. We do infer device behavior by looking at authentication traffic and data access activity and IP addresses, but we don't actually monitor the endpoint specifically. For on-prem servers, the answer is it depends on the server. So if we're looking at, say, NAS platforms like NetApp or EMC or HP or Hitachi, we use they're not technically APIs, but they're the equivalent of APIs. It's a built-in subsystem that we use to pull audit information. But on, say, a local Windows file server or Unix server, there is no auditing subsystem that we can use. Native auditing in Windows is a nightmare and nobody turns it on because it writes to disk. It's really resource intensive. So we don't want to use that. So we built we call it a file system driver or kernel driver. It sits at basically at the kernel level and looks at disk activity. And we use that to monitor the behavior, the opens and creates and moves and modifies and deletes. It never writes to disk. There's actually a watchdog service that'll make sure that it never takes a certain amount of CPU and memory. So it's very lightweight. And we have an agent for Windows servers. We have a similar agent for Unix servers. We have something similar for on-premises Exchange and SharePoint as well, because much like with file auditing on a Windows server, the built-in auditing in SharePoint Exchange is super resource intensive in different ways. So we don't want to use those either. But again, for NAS platforms, we're just using kind of the APIs. For other servers, we do have agents. We put nothing on the endpoint though, so there's nothing you have to worry about on your workstations. I know everybody's got endpoint fatigue. And then in the cloud, we're just using APIs.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that really helps people understand a lot of kind of how we do things. So for the next question, in the event, we looked at an example of an attacker attempting to guess passwords. How does that attacker go about this type of attacker situation without locking out the account or without kind of really raising those flags that are traditional for AD?
Really smart question. And what the attacker did in this scenario, for those that don't remember, we did what's called a password spray. And the attacker is trying login and password combinations for different accounts. And it's a really smart question. Why didn't this trigger a lockout? Well, in this case, our attacker is smart enough. He knows that it's probably going to be 3 or more failed authentications is going to trigger a lockout. And he doesn't want to do that since that's extremely noisy. All these accounts are going to start getting locked out. So what he does is he only tries 1, maybe 2, I think in our scenario it was only 1, but 1 or 2 password combinations per account.
Right.
Now, that might make it sound like it's much less likely to be successful, and in general it is, but if you have a good password dictionary, you can, all you need is 1 successful authentication, right? So in this case, and it's part of the reason that in our scenario, this particular password spray failed, we just wanted to show you what it would actually look like. What our attacker did is he tried 1 login and password combination for 30 different accounts, not 30 combinations for 1 account. And that 30 different accounts is one of the things that was really interesting about the alert that fired. It said there's a possible password spray attack because what it saw is a single device authenticating with 30 different accounts, all of them failed. And it's like, that's really weird behavior because why would that be happening? Why would 30 people be using the same device at once to log in? Of course, they never would.
Right, exactly. So this one's a softball one, and I think probably the audience listening is going to know the answer to this one too. But can Varonis respond to detected anomalies?
I mean, unless you've used Varonis, you may not know this. So all of our alerts, there's a few things you can do with our alerts. First of all, of course, it puts up an alert in our dashboard that you can investigate. We showed you that. You can also have alerts, of course, be sent by email. You might send them to a distribution list, and each alert, each threat model can be configured differently for different types of output. You can also send our alerts via syslog. So one way to automatically respond is to send our alert to a SOAR or other orchestration tool, and then trigger some sort of action. You can also send our alert to something like a network access control that would do network segmentation or something. Or one of the output options, and you can have any combination of all of these. You could, of course, send to the dashboard and send an email and send syslog and trigger a script. And those scripts you can trigger, we usually use PowerShell to do it, and PowerShell can basically do anything in Windows. And so those scripts, a very common one, and we'll help you set these up, and we've got some in our online Connect database that you can go and kind of get some samples of. We'll do things like, all right, we got an alert that this human account is behaving like a piece of ransomware. Let's shut that down. So the steps that you might take, in pseudocode or broadly, all right, let's disable the account. Let's set the account to disabled in Active Directory. Let's scramble the kerberos token so that account, even if it's authenticated, can't go access anything else. Let's disable the NIC on the laptop because we're getting an IP address. So we know the device. Let's look up the device, then disable that network card. We can look up the MAC address and just make sure that that network card can't be used, because even if the account is disabled, our attacker might have access to the endpoint, could use another account and continue. So the answer is yes, and that's kind of a SOAR light functionality. It's not full security orchestration, but you can take immediate actions. And again, because each threat model and each alert can be configured differently, you wouldn't do this for, say, everything. Hey, I got alerted that an administrative account was accessing a certificate file. Shut them down and lock them out. We don't want to do that. But for really severe alerts, it's generally worth doing.
Yeah, makes sense. You actually answered the very next question that I had in the series that dealt with, hey, because we have this information, the IP address, we can take these actions. So you hit it right out of the park, and you pre-answered my next question. So awesome. The other question that I had too, and this comes up fairly often, and I know that I have Ryan on our Threat Update show, but something that customers ask fairly frequently is, we have a Varonis incident response team. Is that included as a service for our customers?
It is. So the incident response team is complimentary. If you're a Varonis customer, you get access to them. You can go through your account team or send an email to support@varonis.com. They'll put you in touch with them. They're really good. Yeah, they're really good in a few scenarios. One, if you get an alert and you're not really sure what's going on, just give us a call. They'll get on the line. They'll help you with the investigation. They're an extra set of hands. They can also help make sure that your alerts are tuned properly and optimized. So if you're getting, sometimes you can have an application that's behaving on a file system that's triggering some alerts, and instead of just ignoring them, let's tune those out, and they'll make sure that everything is set up and working properly, and the alerts are going to the right places. If you want to connect us to your SIM, like Splunk or Sentinel or QRadar or Logarithm or something, they'll help you do that. But the short answer to the question is, that's totally complimentary. And I've often gotten asked, why is that? Why do you offer free incident response services? Well, it's part of our customer experience. We want you to get value out of the platform, and specifically data alert. Second of all, when data alert fires an alert, there's a lot of context in the alert. It doesn't take a lot of investigation to figure out what's going on. And then because all the data access activity and the AD telemetry and the perimeter telemetry is all there, the investigations don't take very long either. So when our IR team, I still can't get that out. Our IR team is engaged. It's not like they're spending weeks or months trying to figure out what happened. Like it might happen, a lot of other security vendors sell IR services, and it's kind of revenue for them, because if they know when they're engaged, they're going to be there for a couple of months. For us, we're probably going to be there for an hour or two. We want to make sure that you know what's going on and that we can help you. And we also learn a lot, of course, because whenever there's something like SolarWinds and Sunburst, or there's an APT like DarkSide or Emotet or Maze, our customer base is so large now that they're calling us up, and our IR guys are on site. We learn, hey, here's how these APTs behave. There was one, and I'm not going to say, there was an American manufacturer that got hit with a really sophisticated APT a few months ago. And they called us up. Our IR guys got on. The attackers were still in the network. We were observing them. We were, setting up honeypots. We were making sure that nothing was exfiltrated. We were analyzing the behavior, and then we use all that to develop new threat models. If we see a technique or an approach or something that we know, hey, we can use this because other customers will likely be subject to this in the future, we learn a lot too. So it's a huge benefit for us. We want you to engage our IR team, and that's why we don't charge for it.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, that's really exciting, and I love talking to Ryan and Kyle on the threat updates, because again, I love hearing those kind of things that they get into in the research that we do. So that's really kind of cool too. I'm gonna jump into one that's a little bit more in the weeds. So, can changing the KerbeTGT password help defend against certain types of AD attacks? And how would one do that?
Yeah. So as for how,
Yeah.
it's been a long time since I've administered AD, so
Right.
I'm not even exactly sure the steps you're supposed to go through. There's probably a knowledge base article on it, so I would just
We
Google.
have that.
Yeah. Do we? I'm sure we
do
do in our blog somewhere. Yeah. Why would you do it? Well, that's your Kerberos domain password. If
Right.
anybody gets a hold of that, they can craft golden tickets, which they can
Right.
use to do anything.
Mhm.
So you want to change it relatively frequently. The longer, just like with any password, the longer that it's stale, the more likely it is it's going to be abused. So one of our risk indicators for AD is, do you have any delinquent Kerberos passwords? Go change them. So
Right.
the answer is yes, it can be exploited. Yes, you should rotate those on a regular basis if you'd like to do that. Google, Varonis, whatever it is, the password, Kerberos password, and you point you to the article that'll tell you how to do that.
I have
Put
it
that in
handy,
the show
so I'll put a
notes,
link. So I'll put it down in the description for everybody to make it real easy. Cool. All right, so maybe we'll lighten it up a little bit from that one, but it's sort of a connected question. Does Varonis have any kind of best practices or cheat sheets or commands that we use to search an environment for malicious activity? So kind of like threat hunting?
The answer is yeah, and we actually ship with threat hunting queries right out of the box,
Right.
To help you look for. A lot of these were built right at the beginning of COVID, since we had so many customers that were suddenly leveraging our Edge modules that monitor
Right.
VPN, DNS, and proxy. But yeah, we've got out of the box threat hunting queries that you can use. We'll also help you build your own. There is. So, I mean, we could spend another hour on kind of where you
Right.
would start for indications of compromise, and we have a lot of blog articles on it too.
Yeah.
The great thing about the alerting is if you're not seeing any alerting at all, you can start with the threat hunting queries, but typically any misbehavior anywhere along the kill chain is going to start triggering some Varonis alerting. So take a look at your alerting, and going back to the question a couple questions ago, get the IR team. If you've got data alert, get them, have them do, we call it it's called a data alert operationalization process, DLS ops, where they will, it's a couple of weeks. I think it's like 5 or 6 sessions that they go through. Again, totally free.
Right.
And they'll just make sure, is everything working? Do we see anything weird? Are there any indications of compromise? They'll show you how to use it. They'll make sure the alerts are not just turned on and configured, but going to the right place. And that's a pretty good place to start too.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of take it up a little bit even higher level than the last question. Does Varonis maintain a list of NIST 800 like 171 or CMMC compliance controls that we help cover?
Yeah, for NIST, the answer is 100%.
Yeah.
If you Google Varonis NIST, and it'll take you right to a blog post that goes down to detail, and we can give you a PDF that lays them all out. CMMC as well. There's the different levels of CMMC. By the way, this is true for any compliance acronym salad that you want to throw out there. SOX, HIPAA, PCI, CMMC, GDPR, CCPA, LGPD, PIPEDA, LGBT. They go on and on and on and on.
Right.
And I know this because, and Kilian, you've done this too. My first job at Varonis, I can start saying this now. I've been here for 11 years. My first job at Varonis was in technical marketing, and I had to create a lot of these documents, and you've done that kind of thing too. So we keep these things up to date. We know that they help when you're like, listen, I know somebody's asking, how do we meet these controls?
Absolutely.
And you can just pop them into a spreadsheet and say, hey, look, here's how we're going to do this for the data stores that Varonis covers. So the answer is best way is to just Google it. And in fact, this answer is probably took longer to listen to than it would have been to find. So.
Right. Absolutely. And again, I have some of these on hand because Brian, like you mentioned, I've been in this, so I have that around. I'll put that in there too, because that's a pretty frequent question. We're going to change gears just a little bit on these next 2 questions. These are more about ecosystem and where we fit in. So this is, it's not 100% verbatim. I shortened it just a little bit to protect the innocent, I suppose, from the person asking. But the person in the session asked, we are considering starting a DLP project, but after seeing Varonis, we're reconsidering that plan. Does Varonis replace DLP?
So there's a lot of ways to go with this answer. The answer,
Sure.
the short answer is Varonis is not DLP.
Sure. Yeah.
So DLP I think of it as a very perimeter technology, but
Mm-hmm.
it looks at data over the wire. It'll block things from being sent or shared.
Mm-hmm.
We don't do that.
Right.
A lot of DLP involves endpoint protection. That's
Yeah.
not what Varonis is doing either. There's a little bit of overlap with classification, but here's what I will say in my experience. It's very easy to spend a lot of time and energy and money on DLP projects that end up failing and not really making any significant changes. I have, again, I've been doing this for 11 years. We have seen a lot of organizations that have rethought their DLP strategy and said, you know what, Varonis, it makes more sense to have Varonis in place first, because think about what data loss prevention, these tools are trying to do is to block sensitive information from being transmitted outside the organization. But the whole reason that might happen is if people have access to data that they're not supposed to have access to. And Varonis solves that core problem first. So I will say Varonis does not replace DLP. However, you are much more likely to be successful with DLP if you have Varonis in place first. And you might find that some of the things that you think that DLP is going to give you, you don't need, or Varonis does a little bit better. So we are not a DLP product, but we can certainly augment and complement it. And I think the person who asked this question might be thinking along the right lines. It might make sense to have Varonis in place first. And that's where we've seen organizations be really successful.
Absolutely. So another one, again, sort of similar type of question. In this particular session, we were talking about the on-prem AD environment, but we also cover Azure AD. So this person's question was, how does Varonis, the Varonis AD solution and Data Alert Suite integrate with Azure Sentinel or enhance their investment in Microsoft 365 if they have like an E5 license, for example?
Great question. So we're solving a different problem than you would get with E5. Sentinel, of course, is Microsoft SIM. You could have asked about MCAS, which is Microsoft's cloud application security, their CASB. AIP, which is or MIP, which is Microsoft Information Protection, which is really their DLP set of functionality. We are solving a different problem, which is making sure that people don't have access to what they're supposed to, and that you can really measure and understand risk. And we're detecting and helping you respond to threats in a different way. We fully support Microsoft 365, which includes Azure Active Directory, so we can monitor Azure AD there. We support and can classify data and map all of the access controls, all of the permissions for every file, folder, and site collection in OneDrive and SharePoint Online. We do the same thing for Exchange Online as we do for on-premises Exchange. And all that activity is combined with your on-prem activity and is analyzed in the same way, analyzed and enriched in the same ways for profiling and alerting. So we don't replace E5. We're solving a completely different problem. You're not going to be able to measure risk and reduce it effectively unless you use Varonis. It's what we're really seeing in 365 is, and I think one of the reasons you might have asked this question, you might be experiencing this too. It's one thing to try to secure a couple of files and a couple of folders and a couple of SharePoint sites. It's another thing entirely to do it with even 10 terabytes of data where the number of files is in the millions and every one of them has individual permissions and you don't know who's got access inside and outside and the collaboration is changing constantly. We're designed to solve that problem. So as for Sentinel specifically, how do we integrate there? Just like we do with other SIM, we can take the alerts that Data Alert creates and we send them to your SIM. So now you have those in the same place, and you don't have to worry about trying to suss out any kind of value from all of the activity behavior. Varonis is really your brain, your expert system, and we'll send those alerts. And hey, something's wrong based on what we're seeing. We send that to Sentinel.
The other thing I think is probably worth pointing out if the audience doesn't know this is that we do integrate with Microsoft MIP, so we can, if you're going to move that move to the cloud there, and you want to find the documents and label them, Varonis can help with that. We can do the detection and we can do the labeling in conjunction with MIP. So definitely worth mentioning if people are going down that path, because it's something that gets asked fairly frequently.
Yeah, and on that note too, we can also scan the files to see if they've been labeled or not, or if they've been mislabeled or not. And then, as you say, we can apply the MIP labels, so you can make sure you've got accurate labels for Microsoft's DLP, which will block those files from being sent or shared, or encrypt, or have persistent security on those files. And that's how we integrate there.
Perfect. I think that'll definitely help a lot of people. So I'm going to switch gears. I think we've covered all of the questions from our Active Directory session. We're going to jump into ones focused around the Varonis automation engine now. So the first question that we have is, during the session, we mentioned some statistics that a breach should cost businesses of upwards of maybe $500 million, give or take. What are the components of this cost estimate? Is it paying ransom for ransomware? Is it compliance fines? Is it lost revenue, brand damage? What kind of goes into this figure?
Yep.
Fair enough.
Also, operational costs.
Yeah.
So, ransomware can take down parts of your business and completely stop it from functioning. We've seen municipalities, the cities of Atlanta and Baltimore got hit.
Right.
Reputational damage can be massive, and it's not just ransomware these days.
Yeah.
Ransomware is often the last step in the process before somebody contacts you and says, "Hey, I've got your data and it's encrypted.
Right.
Pay me to get it back. If you don't pay me, you think you've got backups. I've encrypted your backups, but even if you think you can get them back, I've got your data and I'll release it on the dark web. So, and I'll publicize the fact that you were breached."
Right.
So there is, that number comes from all of these components. It's the cost of getting the data back, the reputational damage, the operational damage, the recovery costs, all of this, the investigation costs. It's it can be a bear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have some reference material to share with folks too, kind of around where we're gathering that up as well. Because that's, and I think, to quote you from earlier, Brian, probably will take quicker to Google that and go through all of it, but I can share that with everyone as well. In terms of the functional bits then of Automation Engine, something that comes up is what teams in an organization typically own Automation Engine or that part of the process?
That's a good question. It's often security.
Sure.
Sometimes it's storage. Sometimes because the Automation Engine focuses on CIFS, it can be Windows administration. It depends on the organization, whose ever job it is to, ensure proper access. The thing about open access, the thing about the problem the Automation Engine solves, and it does it automatically and at scale, is open access is clearly a data protection problem, since data that's open isn't protected at all. It's clearly a compliance and privacy problem because you don't have privacy by design. Because it's open to everybody. It's clearly a security problem because nobody has to escalate privileges to get access to that data. Yeah. So it can fall under kind of any one of those buckets. I've seen it being led by privacy and compliance or legal. I've seen it. They're generally not operating it though. It's going to fall under the CISO, since it's usually that person's, it's her or his responsibility to make sure that data is locked down and properly protected. Right. And that's what the Automation Engine accomplishes.
No, that's perfect. I think that'll clear it up, because again, I've heard the exact same things from customers and prospects. Like, where does this typically fall? We want to do this initiative, but who cares really, or who has the initiative to drive it forward?
Well, one way to think about it is the problem of open access can lead to breaches, can lead to insider threat. It can lead to ransomware, because that data is going to get locked down. So who would the axe fall on if any one of those things happened? They're probably the ones that are going to want to own the Automation Engine to make sure it doesn't. Absolutely.
So this is I'm going to combine these next two questions together because we got them from a few different folks, but this is coming from a customer or prospect thinking down this kind of path a little bit. Can Varonis Automation Engine help us implement a role-based access control problem? And the second question that I want to tie together is, what about a zero trust initiative?
Good questions. So the first one is, the answer is yes, but think very carefully about applying role-based access to data. It generally doesn't work. Right. Data is almost by its very nature cross-functional. Data ends up being cross roles. It ends up, and this is why you end up with such chaos. Role-based access really doesn't work on data, especially file systems. So the answer is, if you have data that's open to everybody, you're not applying any role-based access to it. Role-based access might be better than nothing, but trying to apply it ends up being very chaotic and usually very unsuccessful. So I would, if you're really thinking along those lines, reach out and let's have a meeting, and I can tell you in detail why role-based access is not going to work for file systems, and in fact, you might end up causing more trouble than it's worth. Sure. Second question, though, is the answer is 100% yes, zero trust. So zero trust is the principle that users, devices, applications should not have access to systems or data that they don't need to have access to, except for a very specified business function, and only have that access for as long as they need. If you've got data open to everybody, you're not applying zero trust at all. So the first step to getting to a zero trust model is locking that data down to just who needs it, and then making sure that those access controls are maintained over time as needs change. So the answer is 100% yes. If you're going down the zero trust path and you're not thinking about the automation engine to lock things down, you're going to hit a wall at some point because there's no way to apply zero trust unless you use this.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that helps clear up, again, both of those that are pretty common questions that we hear from customers. So what I want to do is I want to take it maybe a little bit more technical now in terms of how the automation engine works. So as we went through the session, and again, if you want to watch it, we go through kind of very detailed steps on this. When we're doing the remediation, automation engine, one of the things it can do is create a new Active Directory group. And when it does that and adds the users and applies it to the ACL, do the users have to log off and log back on again to refresh their token before removing the global access?
That's a really, really good question. And one of the things that the automation engine does is actually wait a predetermined period of time. By default, it's 72 hours because that's the default kerberos token refresh time.
Right.
So users, if they haven't logged out and logged back in after 72 hours, the kerberos tokens will refresh.
Right.
So what the automation engine does is it applies the new group that was created. It waits 72 hours, then it pulls off the global group. So the answer is no. Users do not have to log out and log back in. If you do it, where you're required to them, it ends up being incredibly disruptive.
Yeah.
Less disruptive than not having them have access at all.
Right.
But yeah, you don't want to break anything. So that's part of what that waiting period, that baked-in waiting period is, where it'll wait for their tokens to refresh. It'll wait for users to make sure everybody's logged out and logged back in, or their tokens have refreshed, so that when we pull off the global group, they'll be fine.
Yeah, that was, I know, just from my time in the field and talking to customers, that was always a big hesitance that they would express when staring down one of these remediation projects. So it's definitely, I think, reassuring that we've kind of solved it before they've asked, in a sense. The next question is, once they've gone through a remediation project, so they've gone through, automation engine has run, we offer what I guess I'd call a safety net. So Varonis has a rollback capability built into that in case they need to revert for some reason. Do you know, or can you shed some light on how far back that rollback exists, or how long they would have to do that?
That's a good question. I'm not even sure I know the answer. Kilian, you might know the answer to this. So the way the changes work is it goes through what we call our commit engine, which is kind of a change management engine. And it keeps track of all the changes that we make in the order that we make them in, with all the dependencies. So if you ever need to roll it back, you can. I don't know if there's a limit to that, though. I don't know if we, I've never heard of anybody saying I need to roll something back when I don't have the ability to roll it back. Typically, once you get past, it's like a month or two, are you really going to go and roll it back? Because by that point, other changes may have been made, but I don't know. I don't think there's a limit, but I might be wrong.
That was a good stumper. I honestly, and again, this is not hubris or anything, but I don't think I've ever had a customer, anybody, say that we've gone through, we want to roll back after they've done the the global group remediation process. Not to say that maybe it hasn't happened, but not that I know of.
Typically, if there's going to be a rollback, it's going to be immediate because there's something happened very specifically that we need to roll back. So, and we certainly have the ability to do it, but over a long period of time, you're probably not going to roll it back.
I think, and I'll go out on a limb, and someone maybe, if they're watching, can correct me, but I think as long as you don't make any other changes on top of it, past that, I think you can probably roll back, I'm not going to say indefinitely, but as long as you don't make any additional changes past that, you should be able to roll back.
But even if you do, the dependencies are kept, you should be able to keep rolling back. So
that's true.
We can take this offline and follow up, but generally once you get, once it's been a couple of weeks, I'm not sure why you'd want to roll it back. Maybe even a quarter, but
yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, we're gonna kind of pivot the last question of the bunch. In terms of doing some of that remediation, kind of bringing data owners into the fold, this is not specifically around the automation engine bit itself, but more along the lines of kind of the periphery and stale data. So when looking at stale data in the system, so you're, whatever the process they're going through, what's the best approach for determining ownership given that the data is stale?
It's a good question. Generally, there might not be a good approach.
Right.
The file system owner is probably wrong. The last access and the last modified is going to be ancient at that point. That might give you a starting point. Generally, we see a successful strategy being don't worry about the owner. Lock that data down. Just lock it down, and then maybe you lock it down for 6 months and see if anybody comes calling for it, and then you delete it. But don't chase ghosts.
Right.
Don't spend time worrying about data ownership for stale data. Worry about the data that's being used.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's typically, at least working with the customers that I work with, that seems to be the approach that they take, and it seems to work well. Again, there's plenty of fires that us in IT and security have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Like you said, chasing ghosts is probably not high on
I
the
mean,
list.
you can. I mean, realistically, you can look at last access, last modified. You can look at file system owner. You can look at the permissions on the folder.
Sure.
That might lead you in the right direction, assuming they're not open to everybody. So,
Right.
yeah, but I wouldn't worry about that. Getting data owners involved is hard enough when you actually have a record that they're the ones
Right.
using data, let
Makes
alone
sense.
data that they haven't touched, that nobody's touching. Nobody's
Right.
going to want to own that.
Absolutely. I think that brings us to the end of the questions. Brian, any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
No.
Put you on the spot. There we go.
Yeah, we're getting to the end of a really long week, but these are really good questions. I'm glad they were. I'm glad these sessions were useful for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, if you got anything else, you guys know where to find us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Brian. I really appreciate it, and thank you all for watching. I think we brought some really great questions. If you have any other questions, we'll have some details to reach out to us. Brian or I or anyone at Varonis are happy to have a call and a conversation and dive into these details more. And other than that, thank you again for spending time with us. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please consider giving us a like. That really helps. Or maybe leave a comment. Let Brian and I know how we did. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you want to get additional content. We produce some at least every week and sometimes more often. So thank you all for watching. Thank you, Brian. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.